It's Tuesday, everyone, and you're watching CBC News BC. I'm Benit Brach. We're here in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. So let's get to your top stories today. In North Vancouver, some tragic news. A 17-year-old boy fell to his death from a cliff in Lynn Canyon Park. That happened around 3 p.m. on Sunday, and responders say the boy crossed a safety fence to get a little closer to the cliff edge when he fell into the rocks below.
He had 3 friends with him who were back behind a barrier fence about 20 feet away from the cliff edge, so we're unable to see him and really didn't know if he'd where he'd landed, if he was still there, if he'd moved away. So to begin with, we didn't really know. He was not moving. We knew he was unconscious, but it wasn't until we were able to get a rescuer lowered down to him using rope system that we determined that he unfortunately had passed away.
Yeah, it's really sad. And the teen was from Windsor, Ontario. He was going to start school at UBC this fall. Just as a reminder, officials have also been warning not to cliff jump from the rocks, saying there have been 40 deaths in that park over the past 50 years. And Canada will also be cutting back on how many temporary foreign workers come to the country. That's with exemptions for some industries, such as food security sectors like agriculture. The government loosened restrictions after reports of labor shortages post-COVID-19. But Ottawa is reversing that measure after some experts said the surge fueled unemployment among immigrants and young people. Still, advocates say the federal government is scapegoating migrant workers.
Canada has a population of over 42 million. Reducing 60,000 workers won't actually increase that many jobs because these are actually very specific jobs. And as I said, some of those industries, as you said, are left out. So this discussion, we're not addressing the problem. We are blaming the wrong actor, and that's a disservice to all of us. It will migrants will continue to be exploited.
Now, in places where there is high unemployment, that's 6% or higher, the government said employers will not be able to hire low-wage temporary foreign workers. And Chinese-made electric cars are soon going to be slapped with some major tariffs. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau said a 100% surtax will be levied starting in October. That's basically doubling their price. All of this to help Canada's EV industry compete at home. And the CBC's Sophie Woodruff headed to Richmond Auto Mall to get some reaction here.
China, they have so many options. If they are trying to get into this market, it's gonna be big challenge for local company.
No, I understand this tariff. I'm just not sure, if people are still afford to buy the Chinese EV.
Do you think we'll see Chinese-made EVs come into the Canadian market despite this tariff?
They will do.
Now, in a statement, the Chinese embassy says it's expressing strong dissatisfaction and firm opposition to these tariffs, so not happy about that. And soccer fans, the Vancouver team that will play in the new Canadian Professional Women's Soccer League now has a new name. It's Vancouver Rise FC, there it is. And they're one of 6 clubs in the Northern Super League, and the Rise will play against teams in Halifax and Ottawa, Toronto, Calgary, and the inaugural season kicks off next April. So there you go, some more soccer to enjoy. And those are your morning headlines. I'm Benit Brach. You're watching CBC News BC. Stay with us. More news coverage on the way. BC Today is up next.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Well, another tragic death at Lynn Canyon Park. A 17-year-old from Ontario who was just about to start at UBC fell after getting close to the edge. We'll speak with North Vancouver Fire Rescue. And the federal government will impose new tariffs on electric vehicles from China. How will that affect prices and availability? Are you still interested in an EV? Can you afford one? Call us on that. In half an hour, back to school is next week. We'll talk about budgeting and financial strategies for students for the year ahead. I'm Michelle Eliot. Welcome to BC Today. We begin with tragic news out of North Vancouver. A teenage boy has died after falling from a cliff in Lynn Canyon Park. It happened around 3 p.m. on Sunday. Now, the teen was from Windsor, Ontario, and was set to start studies at UBC in the fall. To tell us more about this now, I'm joined by North Vancouver Assistant Fire Chief Dwayne Durbin. Good afternoon.
Hi, Michelle.
Thank you for joining us. What can you tell us about what happened on Sunday?
Yeah, well, as you said, just a tragic incident occurred, Lynn Canyon Park, right in the middle of the District of North Vancouver, our response area. So, as you mentioned, the young teen was visiting the area. He was new to the coast. He was out with 3 of his friends from Windsor to help get him settled for his upcoming term at UBC, and went for a hike in Lynn Canyon and managed to get behind one of the fences that demarcates the cliff. It's a very dramatic canyon, as most of you probably know, and lots of areas that are not very safe to walk. So he found himself in that area and managed to get too close to the edge and slip off.
Yeah, it really is tragic. And we know about the risks of cliff jumping. We hear about warnings when it comes to cliff jumping at Lynn Canyon. But he wasn't doing that. He was getting closer to the edge, climbed over that safety fence. Can you tell us more about that terrain, that slope, and how risky is that?
Yeah, no, as you mentioned, most of our calls in this area have to do with the creek and the water. This was in the canyon. It was next to the creek, but it wasn't in the creek. So, yeah, this was a cliff edge that was fenced off. It's been fenced off for a long time. The parks personnel are really good at making sure people are aware of where the safe areas are to walk and where it's not so safe. So, in this case, one of the teens, exploring, looking for a better view of the canyon, hopped over the fence and like I said, just got too close.
How frequent are these tragedies? They are becoming much too frequent. What more can be done about it?
Yeah, no, we do respond there fairly often. Luckily, usually it's a sprained ankle or an abrasion. Oftentimes it has to do with the cliff jumping in the creek. Our main message is please, please, please don't go in there into the creek without knowing the water levels. You're allowed to swim in the creek. There's lots of safe areas. People can do it if they know the area. There's other areas you can go to, but if you're new to the area, like these young men were from Windsor, you can get into trouble. Now, this is a little bit different because they weren't cliff jumping. They weren't in the water. I think they were just trying to get closer to the edge. But the reality is, if there's a fence there and somebody's taken the time to set it up and it's well marked with signage, and we really want you to come enjoy the landscape, but the fences are there for a reason, and it's just better not to cross over, even if it looks like lots of people have been there in the past. Yeah, just stay on the right side of the fence.
And beyond fencing and signage, what more can be done? What other safety measures can be placed there?
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot about we could fence the whole thing off and put up 12-foot high fences. We've chosen not to do that because we want to have people to have access and be able to go there, but we really just caution people to use your common sense and know that we don't put those fences in lightly. They're not casual. They're not a suggestion. They're really a hard marker. So I think it's more about public education, about telling the stories and and trying to get the message home that before they come, they're aware. And if you see lots of signage on the way in, stop and take time to read those signs, because they're not there for our enjoyment. They're there just to protect you and your family. I really, my heart goes out to the family of this young man in Windsor. I know what they're dealing with now is the worst news you can expect to get as a parent. So, our sincere condolences from the District of North Vancouver to that family.
I can't imagine the grief of this family, young man, 17 years old, about to start a life at university. Indeed, what a tragedy. I understand this is something that hits close to you personally.
Yeah, Michelle, I don't mind sharing. And just my hope is that, my story began 80 years ago, and I'm hoping that there's still a place for it today, or it'll have an impact. But what happened in 1944 is my uncle, who I never met. He was 16 years old, was visiting the North Shore from Vancouver, and managed to die a tragic death in the same way over a cliff. And I never met him, but my dad, we just buried him at the ripe old age of 92. This past summer, we placed a grave in his honor, and we had a marker for his older brother, who had never been truly remembered well. So this is 80 years later, and I'm mourning a teen that I never knew, and I can't imagine the parents and the grief that they're feeling. So, if anyone's listening and they hear this story, one small jump of a fence can lead to this kind of trauma. So I really, I implore you to think twice before you do that.
I appreciate your sharing that story, Assistant Fire Chief. And I know amid this very sad case, this is a big day for you. You are retiring today. So I want to say thank you for your work and the story that you've shared. And thank you for spending time with us today.
Yeah, my pleasure, Michelle. Thank you.
That's North Vancouver Assistant Fire Chief Dwayne Durbin. It's now 12:13 Pacific Time. This is BC Today. Now, the federal government is aiming to reduce the number of temporary foreign workers through new restrictions and limits. We talked about this yesterday on the show when we asked for your thoughts. Now, Joseph wrote us an email. It will be a lot easier for kids and students, etc., to get work. This crazy plan squeezed out more people than we think, and the Trudeau government will own up to it. Sheena writes, the program has been abused from the beginning and should have been modified long ago. Employers use the fact that these workers don't know Canadian employment laws to underpay and overwork them. Randy writes, I'm waiting for one word I haven't heard: greed. The exploitation of the foreign workers will continue to happen. Look for a rise in strong labor movements as the backlash builds. Now, this morning on the early edition, host Stephen Quinn spoke with Syed Hassan, Executive Director of Migrant Workers Alliance for Change. And Hassan says he's concerned temporary foreign workers are being scapegoated.
The issue is when there is an exploitable workforce tied to the employer, unable to live anywhere else, unable to work anywhere else, where the employer has the power to deport you and ban you from returning. There is a fundamental imbalance of power between temporary foreign workers and their employers. This change today does not fix the power imbalance. All it does is respond to a media criticism. It responds to some partisan economists and premiers using the fact of migration as a way to distract from the true causes of our housing affordability crisis. We have global inflation. People are struggling to make ends meet. They're looking for answers, and they're being lied to, and those lies are hurting us, and those lies are creating a huge increase in racism and xenophobia that will be hard to turn back from.
$12:15 now, and Prime Minister Justin Trudeau announced yesterday a 100% tariff on Chinese electric vehicles. He said it was necessary to allow this country's emerging industry to compete and to, quote, level the playing field for Canadian workers. Well, today, the Chinese Commerce Ministry urged Canada to reverse that decision, saying Canada was violating World Trade Organization rules, suggested there would be future consequences for it. Now we're asking you for this segment of BC Today, would you buy a Chinese manufactured EV? How do you think this tariff will affect prices and availability? And do you still think that you can afford an electric vehicle at this point? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can also hit pound 690 on your cell phone. And you can email bctoday@cbc.ca. We're joined now by Werner Antweiler, Associate Professor with UBC's Sauder School of Business. Good afternoon. Thanks for being with us.
Good afternoon, Michelle. Thank you for having me on your program today.
It's good to speak with you. The Prime Minister yesterday said that this was about leveling that playing field, imports from China, when it comes to imports from China, and that this is about China's unfair advantage when it comes to electric vehicles. Is he right?
He's only about half right. There have been determinations from the European Union and others that China is in fact subsidizing electric vehicle manufacturing and battery manufacturing. Of course, right now here in Canada, we don't have any active EV production plant. None of the major manufacturers actually has a plant. They're all under construction and they will be going online next year or through the next several years. So right now, there are not very many jobs at stake, but there will be down the road.
Okay, so they're placing tariffs on EVs from China, but yet there isn't manufacturing happening here right now.
That's right. We are importing some vehicles from China, mostly from Tesla's Gigafactory in Shanghai. But here in Canada, we're only at the early stages of cranking up production. Most of the announcements have been from the car manufacturers for retooling existing plants. Some of this actually is still getting slow-tracked simply because the demand isn't quite there. Whereas other manufacturers are opening up manufacturing plants for EV batteries and building up our EV supply chain.
So what do you think will be the impact of these tariffs?
At the outset, it will be quite minimal because the vehicles that are coming into Canada from China are mostly Teslas from the Gigafactory. And Tesla may be able to actually redirect output from plants in the United States, in California and Texas to meet the demand here in Canada, which is relatively small compared to the demand in the United States. So the reshuffling of production will take place, and they will be sending some of the output from their Chinese plant somewhere else. So at the outset, I do not expect to be much of a noticeable impact on Canadian consumers, simply because a major manufacturer that's impacted will be able to readjust their production.
We heard a reaction yesterday from the automotive parts manufacturers applauding the tariffs as a way to, again, level the playing field for workers and manufacturers in Canada. But those who are pushing for climate solutions are worried about this having a chilling effect on that demand that, as you say, is less than in the United States. And will this affect, people's interest, Canadians' interest in electric vehicles, thinking, okay, they're going to be even less affordable now?
Yes. So what we're looking for in propelling the EV transition forward is more choice, more variety that consumers can choose from. And when you impose a prohibitive tariff of 100%, and that basically means you're freezing out these producers. We are aware that Chinese manufacturers from BYD to SAIC and Geely are all producing a variety of new electric vehicles at a relatively low cost. But of course, with the caveat that some of these plants and production lines have been heavily subsidized. So from the perspective of a trade economist, the right solution would have been to look at what is the level of subsidization and then counteract that with countervailing duties that would offset the unfair advantage. Whereas what the government now is doing is using a backdoor in our customs tariff to actually basically introduce a prohibitive tariff. So rather than actually trying to offset the unfair level that comes from the subsidies that the government of China has been putting towards manufacturing locally.
I'm joined by Werner Antweiler, professor at UBC Sauder School of Business. We're asking you, in light of the federal government announcing that it would impose, starting in October, 100% tariffs on electric vehicles made in China, also a 25% tariff on steel that's imported from China. We're asking you, what impact do you think that will have on prices of electric vehicles, on the availability of electric vehicles? Are you still interested in purchasing one yourself? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your phone too. And Anton is our first caller now on Bowen Island. Hi, Anton. Welcome back. Hi, Anton. Are you there? Okay, we don't have our connection with Anton at Bowen Island. If you'd like to call us back, please, it's 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. And Werner, what does this mean then for Canada's target of 2035, having all new vehicles sold to be non-combustion vehicles?
Yes, that's a very lofty goal. And the way to meet it is when we see manufacturers all around the world, from North America to Europe to Asia, producing more choice that people feel comfortable buying. And the biggest issue here is the batteries, because the cost of the batteries is still the greatest obstacle to larger EV adoption, because the battery is a significant share of the overall cost. Roughly a third is the cost of the battery. Especially for the longer distances that we drive here in North America compared to those distances that people drive in Europe or Asia. So what we need is the cost of batteries to come down, and that EV supply chain that we need here in North America, that this becomes more affordable, essentially scales up, innovates into new sets of technologies that actually make batteries denser, provide greater range, and essentially become cheaper. So the holy grail of the EV transition is making the batteries cheaper. And the innovation that is coming from manufacturers around the world, that is really what we need. And the more are in the game of developing these innovative solutions, the next generation of cheaper, better batteries, that's what helping propel us forward.
Okay, so looking at that as well. And so how are we doing when it comes to ramping up battery production?
Well, there have been several announcements from manufacturers to build plants in Quebec and Ontario, from Volkswagen, Stellantis, all in partnership with other companies that are specializing in battery technology. All the manufacturers, Ford and GM as well, they're getting in on the game. We also see new entrants like Northvolt that's building a plant in Quebec. So this is really what we need. We need more manufacturers trying different kind of solutions, different approaches, all scaling up this industry, because these economies of scale is what's driving a significant chunk of the cost reductions, as we've seen in China. So in some way, we're learning from China that greater scale and innovation really is the key here. But what we do need desperately is building up our own supply chain that breaks the locks that China has on the processing of various minerals and critical minerals that are involved in the battery technology. Here, the European Union and the United States and Canada are all working towards basically creating a new EV supply chain from scratch, because China has previously had and still has a lock on the processing of many of these critical metals and minerals.
Laurel is calling us from Cloverdale. What are your thoughts on these tariffs on EVs from China, Laurel?
Well, I'm in favor in general, but what I would like to see is for Trudeau to come right out and say, we don't want to let these cars in because we know it's done on the back of mistreated labor. We have global trade. We must now have global employment of some type so that there's standards. We don't deal with people, maybe if China wants to come forward and prove that they're paying these people a decent wage, and they're not being mistreated. And I don't think China likes that when we speak up, but I think the time has come that we must speak up.
Interesting point there too, Laurel, when you talk about given a global market, should there be more uniform standards when it comes to labor, and how would you monitor
that was missing when we jumped into free trade, and it disturbed me deeply then, and it still disturbs me.
Okay.
Yeah. There's some progress been made, but not enough, not near enough.
Laurel, thank you very much. We did hear from,
Thank you.
Nice to hear from you in Cloverdale. Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland did say yesterday that the Chinese EV industry was built on, quote, abysmal labor standards, and it's built on abysmal environmental standards. So talking about the labor conditions there from the Finance Minister. Laurel, thank you for the call. Stan is up next in Coquitlam. What are your thoughts on these tariffs, Stan?
Oh, hi. Thanks for picking up my call.
Sure.
It kind of reminds me in the 80s when U.S. Enforced taxation on the Japanese manufacturers, and a couple of decades past, everything, all small personal cars in North America are pretty much Japanese, and North American manufacturers are almost non-existent, and kind of almost the same situation. And I wonder if it would be a better solution if the government would focus on making domestic manufacturing more competitive, because Chinese, that's the one thing, but then we have European manufacturing like Peugeot, Citroën, Iveco, Skoda, and other ones that are just waiting till the market opens and they're going to flood in. So that's one thing. I'm still looking to buy a car, not the Chinese manufacturer, but at least a electric car, but most likely.
How are the prices hitting you?
Prices hitting me, and I really think that in North America, public transit is really almost, I don't know, it's almost like in Middle Ages comparing to Europe. And as per car, I would really like to see more investment in the public transit.
Okay. So looking at making North American cars more competitive, as well as a public transit aspect of it too. Stan, thank you for the call.
Thanks for having me. Have
Take
a
care.
good day.
You too. John is next in New Westminster. Hi, John.
Hello.
Yeah, what are your thoughts on these tariffs on electric vehicles from China?
Well, I was calling more about the affordability factor of the of EVs. I recently kind of did a study looking for a new car and trying to compare a gas vehicle versus a hybrid versus an electric vehicle. And I've found that electric vehicles are, at least right now, pretty questionable because they carry a high price tag, and it's questionable on their reliability. There's not enough history, and it's also questionable on the the return on your investment. As far as, do I spend? Okay, I don't.
Are you
spend
saving
money
enough on gas? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't spend money on gas anymore, but I'm spending an extra $15,000 or $20,000 for an equivalent electric vehicle over a gas vehicle. And I actually found that a hybrid electric is probably the best of both worlds.
Okay.
If you want to try and do some saving the planet and affordability in gas, to me right now, a hybrid is really the way to go over an electric.
I really appreciate hearing your personal experience and your own research that you've done, John. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's John in New Westminster. Yes, Werner, why don't we end with that? I know that you yourself are a proponent of electric vehicles. And this CBC story on The National yesterday pointed to the most affordable, one of the cheapest EVs available in Canada is an Italian-made Fiat 500e, more than $42,000. So and at this stage, what is it like for a consumer? Is it worth it?
Yeah, the upfront cost is still a big challenge for many because the benefits that accrue over time depend also on how much you drive. The more you drive, the more you can save because electricity is only a quarter of the cost of gasoline per kilometer. So the benefits, they only accrue over this longer time period. But the upfront cost is really turning off a lot of people because even the cheapest vehicle is, as you said, around $40,000. I should mention BC Hydro has a wonderful list of all the EV models available here in the province. And so people can actually go and compare and look at what what kind of incentives are also available from the province and the federal government to actually lower that purchase cost. So with these incentives, once you factor those in, then actually it calculates in some instances, but people need to qualify for these incentives. Here in BC, we have a threshold, an income threshold that applies. That is not the case for the federal incentive, but each prospective buyer should look carefully at the savings they get from how much they drive and also the available incentives.
Werner, always a pleasure to speak with you. Thank you very much.
My great pleasure. Thank you.
Werner Antweiler, Associate Professor with UBC's Sauder School of Business. It's 12:31 now. You're with BC Today here on CBC Television, CBC Radio, live streaming as well on YouTube. I'm Michelle Eliot. Thanks so much for being with us. And coming up in our next half hour, we'll talk more about finances, this time back-to-school budgeting. What are your own back-to-school budget concerns? And what are your financial strategies for managing your budget over the school year? We'll talk about that coming up after this CBC News update. And here's Rob Zimmerman.
Good afternoon. As we've been hearing on the show, a 17-year-old from Ontario who had been set to start at UBC has died after falling off the edge of a cliff in North Vancouver's Lynn Canyon Park. The boy was in an off-trail area Sunday afternoon. The boy's friends told firefighters he had climbed over a fence to get a better look at the river canyon, and he just got too close to the edge. The BC Wildfire Service says a cold front is bringing rain, windy conditions, and fall-like temperatures to much of the province. The latest bulletin says conditions will shift to a warming and drying trend tomorrow and stretch into next week, including the Labor Day long weekend. About 280 fires remain active across BC, with just under 50 classified as burning out of control. And scientists at UBC say they have come up with a portable device that could be used to test how much microplastic is in your morning coffee. They say the device makes microplastic particles glow, and it could help reduce health risks posed by the material. And now the forecast on the North Coast, a mix of sun and cloud this afternoon with a high of 15, highs reaching 12 with showers and thunderstorms in the Peace. In the central interior, including Prince George, a few showers with a high of 13, highs up to 20 degrees with strong winds and showers in the Kootenays. In the southern interior, including Kelowna, a few showers with a high of 17, and mainly cloudy this afternoon in the Fraser Valley, some sunshine in Metro Vancouver and Greater Victoria, with highs from 16 to 19. That's your CBC News update from Vancouver.
Thank you, Rob. You know, yesterday I told you about my trip to San Diego.
You did, yes.
And how we were debating all throughout, but decided not to look up the answer. But we were asking ourselves, was the sitcom Three's Company set in San Diego? And I was thinking of this because we were strolling down the beaches, and I just remember the opening to that show. So I posed the question and kind of mulled it over the air with you. It was not top of mind for you. I don't think it's top of mind for a lot of people. But we got some nice emails.
You got an answer though, right?
Yes. So people emailed us and sent us messages saying Santa Monica was where that show was set.
Similar vibe to San Diego, really. So I understand why you were thinking that.
Yeah,
in San Diego.
It's still hard to understand why that show would come to mind, but
maybe
the mysteries of my mind.
You're on holiday. Your mind wanders a bit.
It's true. Stream of consciousness. None here. Thank you. Thankful for that. Well, maybe right now. Rob, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Rob Zimmerman in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Yeah, thanks so much for all the messages from people saying, I had to look it up when they were talking about Three's Company. So that was actually set in Santa Monica. It was one of the first shows I watched when I arrived here in Canada. Maybe that's why it has such an impact on me and has left an imprint. We have some emails as well on electric cars here. Colin writes, I will not be buying an electric car as they are too expensive. The battery life is too short and costly to replace. I will rather wait for newer technologies such as hydrogen or ammonia-powered cars. Maria writes as well, what about the labor? I would like to save my money and not spend on the backs of these unfortunate workers. Thanks for your emails. Well, back to school can do a number on your budget. There's shopping for school supplies, backpacks, and clothes. But post-secondary students can also worry about big ticket items like housing and food costs. We're asking you, what are your biggest budget concerns as you or your child head back to school? And what are your strategies for sticking to a budget during the school year? Love to hear from you. Call us now, 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can just hit pound 690 on your phone too. If you want to email us, it's bctoday@cbc.ca. And just in time for going back to school, we do have a BC Today travel coffee mug to give away to one lucky caller. We're going to get to your calls in just a few moments. First up, there's a new survey from TD Bank Group, actually, that finds most parents said they are financially supporting their kids in post-secondary. And while students say they have a budget, many wish they knew more about budgeting and financial planning. Well, Meranda Hamilton is Senior Manager of Youth and Student Banking at TD Bank Group. She joins me now from Vernon. Hello, good afternoon.
Hi, good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us. What did you find were the biggest financial concerns among post-secondary students?
Yeah, so when we did this survey, the key findings that stood out the most to me is, and you kind of touched on it a bit, is that 70% of students responded and said that they define themselves as financially unstable, and nearly half went on to explain that that means that they're struggling to afford basic needs like food and housing. And another really interesting point about students that came out of survey is 1 in 5 said that they're actually now primarily going to social media to get financial advice.
Oh my, and what's the impact of that? What's the quality of information they get on social media?
Yeah, I don't recommend social media for financial advice just for two reasons. I would say one, the information, like to your point, is not vetted, right? So the individuals giving that advice might not have the professional qualifications to be giving that advice like a financial planner or a certified financial planner would. And then it also lacks personalization. It's intended for broad audiences and to capture broad audiences. And so it's not going to talk about things that matter to an individual, like their risk tolerance, their income, their expenses. And those are all really important in a financial plan.
And when it came to the students you surveyed, were there differences in their situations, you know, whether they were part-time or full-time students? Were they in province or out of province students? Because the costs can vary according to that as well, right?
Yeah, for sure. There were differences. One that stood out to me specifically in BC is that 4 in 10 students are not working to contribute to their financial education right now. So students that are in that circumstance where they don't have a regular cash flow are needing to live on a fixed income. And so it makes it all that more important that they're pre-planning before the school year starts to make sure that they have a budget and some goals in mind to cover their financial needs.
Okay. And did you specify, did they have to specify? It sounds to me like those would be full-time students then.
They didn't specify in the survey, but okay. I mean, I think it's probably a good hypothesis because we know it's very hard to work when you're going into school for full-time.
Mm-hmm. And what about differences between in-province and out-of-province students? Did you ask those questions?
Yeah, we looked at the prairie students as well, so Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan. And interestingly, we found higher rates of students that were saying that they felt financially unstable in those provinces than we did in BC.
So what about for the parents who are helping out? How much of that is happening and what's the effect of that?
Yeah, so 93% of parents said that they're contributing to their children's post-secondary education. Which it's nearly every parent. And 71% of them said that that's impacting their ability to either meet their financial needs or afford things that they used to, like vacations and getting away.
Yeah, I can imagine a lot of parents thinking about that. I do think about it a lot. I try to do my diligence, you know, with RESPs and things like that. But what are your recommendations for, you know, saving up for parents and students?
Well, I have 2 recommendations for parents and one is kind of for students too. The first one, I love when you talked about how you try to save up with RESPs. And so my recommendation is it's never too early to have those conversations with a financial advisor and start that planning because you can start RESPs early. You can apply for grants in British Columbia that can help you fund your child's education later on if you qualify. You can talk about whether or not financing is a good idea for their education. And even later on in their studies, if you had a student that was pursuing a specialty like medical or dental, there's tailored advice for those scenarios. So there is no wrong time to start planning. And the other piece of advice I would say is just go back to the basics. Our study said that 64% of students want to learn more about budgeting and financial planning. And we're seeing them all over social media this year with trends like loud budgeting and the no buy challenge. And so we know what they want to have the conversation and they're open to the conversation. So just have that one-on-one or with a financial advisor to help.
Yeah, they're yearning for that information. So what about budget strategies then? What budget strategies can you share with students?
Yeah, I think my favorite budgeting strategy is use some of the resources that banks are going to give you. We all have budget calculators to help you create a plan and a budget up front. But one of my favorite tools at TD that we have is like the TD My Spend app. And it gives you spend notifications every time you spend money so that you can watch where your money's going. And it breaks it down between needs and wants for you right on the app. It's a good way to keep yourself honest and keep yourself on track.
Okay, that's what we want to be throughout the school year, on track. Miranda, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Meranda Hamilton is Senior Manager of Youth and Student Banking at TD Group. We're asking you on the open line, what are your biggest budget concerns as you or your child head back to school? Love to hear from you if you're a parent helping out your child in post-secondary as well. What effect is that having on your own budget and your own plans? She mentioned vacations or retirement. And what are your own financial strategies for the school year? 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can hit pound 690 on your cell phone or email bctoday@cbc.ca. I'm joined now in studio by Murray Baker, Manager of Financial Empowerment for Family Services of Greater Vancouver. Hello, Murray. Welcome back.
Hi. Thanks for having me.
What went through your mind as you were listening to Miranda there?
Well, it's certainly not a surprise.
Yeah.
With the cost of living going up so dramatically, students are coming back now, and although tuition in BC is capped at 2%, it's the cost of living, it's the housing, it's the food that is really causing students to struggle. And we see that reflected in increased number of students using food bank, for example. Yeah. And that always is difficult because students don't want to go to a food bank, but out of necessity, they have to.
Wow. And these are issues, right? When you talk about food and housing, you can budget, you can try to save up and be as judicious as you can when it comes to spending, but there are policies involved, broader issues that affect your own affordability for you. So how can these students keep up?
Well, it's difficult. And, part of it is just, as was mentioned earlier, parents helping out in terms of saving early, but the onus can't be just on the parents. So a lot of things students can do is trying to maximize their summer employment, for example. I've talked a lot about this in the past in my writings about getting the jump on the summer job search to try and optimize how much you can save.
How early?
Really early, like in January, people should start getting their resumes out because the best summer jobs get scooped up early. Sure. And so being strategic in that sense as well. And also learning some sort of strategy in terms of putting money aside. And, what was referred to earlier is that students have a yearning for this type of information, and they're not getting it, unfortunately. And if we saw what happened in Ontario, now high school students will have to take a financial literacy test.
Wow.
And it's long overdue in BC.
That is fascinating because it does sound like there's a gap in knowledge of financial literacy. And I've heard this many times, right, repeatedly. That needs to be part of the curriculum. Do you think so?
Absolutely. I mean, history's great, literature's great, poetry's great, but financial is something we're going to use every day of our life. And it's important that students have that understanding early because the dramatic impact of people starting to save early and put money aside for things like a home, retirement, it's dramatic in terms of compound earning. But if people aren't learning this till maybe they're in their 50s, they really have to speed things up.
Yeah, and given the proliferation of all the TikToks out there and Instagram posts of these finfluencers, right? The financial influencers, as we heard, there is that demand for it. Where are you going to get it from? Hopefully not social media, but there it is.
Exactly. And you need trusted source because misinformation can do as much damage as no information at all. So it's important that they have trusted sources that really gives, as was mentioned, specific information for their situation. And, things like saving for RESPs. We have a lot of people who are lower income that don't apply for RESPs because they say, well, there's really no money to put into an RESP. But if you're low income, you can qualify for different grants and bonds that you can access without putting any money into those.
Okay, that's really important to know. Murray Baker is with me from the Family Services of Greater Vancouver, and we're taking your calls. What are your biggest back-to-school budget concerns for yourself or for your child? You can call us 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. If you're a student in post-secondary, we'd love to hear from you. If you're a parent or a family member helping out that student, we would love to hear from you as well. Penny is calling us from Victoria. Hi, Penny.
Hi there.
Hi, welcome to the show. And what did you want to say? What's your experience with schools and schooling and budgeting?
Well, I'm an aunt, and when my niece had a baby, I figured, oh, that lovely little child is going to have a gazillion presents from all the loving relatives. I'm going to funnel my cash towards giving my niece money to put into an RESP.
Wow.
And that's grown because she's fairly modest income. Her contributions have been matched. And when that child gets to post-secondary age, she's going to have money to go to school.
Wow, that's amazing that you had that forethought.
Well, I went to school myself, and it was expensive as heck.
So what difference do you think that will make for your niece?
Oh, she appreciated it so much.
Yeah.
Because, young parents don't really always have a lot of money to make ends meet. And so putting aside $200 a month to put into an RESP can be beyond their reach. And thank you for your show. I didn't know until I heard your previous caller that low-income earners can apply for grants to contribute to RESPs. That's wonderful.
Yes, it is a really important bit of information, and I love that. What a great bit of advice for aunts and uncles, cousins, anyone who wants grandparents, if you want to give a gift.
People might not have $200 a month to put aside, but if every relative put in 20 or 25, it all adds up.
Yeah, it sure does. Penny, thank you very much. What a great idea. Good aunt.
And thank you
Thanks for the call, Penny. All the best to you. Pam is up next now in Revelstoke. Hi, Pam.
Hi.
Thanks very much for calling. And so tell us about your experience. What are your biggest budget concerns? How do you deal with back to school?
Back to school is really hard. I'm a single mom. I'm also an education assistant, so I work in the school. So back to school for me too. But I also run the breakfast program in our elementary school. So we provide breakfast for every student. A plate goes out to every class so that no kid is coming that is hungry.
Absolutely.
And I think that it's maybe important to say to everyone that we have just an extreme amount of kids from every demographic that accesses this program. And so everybody's in the same boat. And I heard a previous caller talk about maybe having some shame about using the food bank. And I just thought...
I don't think that... I'm not sure anybody mentioned shame with food banks.
Or just feeling nervous to use the food bank. I think that there's so many people of everywhere, and all these kids are needing it too, and we're all kind of in this together.
Reducing the stigma, absolutely.
Yeah, actually, we're all struggling with this. Everybody is. So it's pretty huge, and we see it huge in the school, and every year the need does go up.
Wow. And can you tell me a bit about, you're in the school, I mean, you're really connected to this issue from various vantage points, right? For yourself, as a mom, a single mom, what are your own concerns personally for back to school spending?
I would say that, my biggest concerns are like the healthy foods, the nutritious foods, and accessing that. There's seems to be a lot of access to stuff that isn't so great, but it's definitely not going to help us in the long run. So making sure we're budgeting basically for that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Ensuring that you're saving on groceries, but at the same time able to provide healthy foods that may cost more. Pam, thank you very much. Did you want to ask Murray anything? I'd love to put your points to him.
Oh, I'd just love to know if there's any more, I guess, I'd love to see if there's any more communication or talk about funding going into schools to help with this problem. But
yeah, there's always talk about it, whether it translates into action or not. One thing I do want to mention, if oftentimes parents, they're struggling financially, and they're worried, obviously, about being able to afford extracurricular activities for the kids, like sports and music. There are a number of organizations and also the BC government that offers grants for low-income families to enroll their kids in sports. And I think it's important to access those because obviously as a parent, you want your kids to be very involved and not be left out. So there are things like kids sports and different organizations that offer those grants to help get your kids in sports.
And always a conversation about, the national school food lunch program, and that conversation coming from the federal government on that. And I know what you mean about those many students accessing the breakfast club. I've seen that at my own kids' school. Pam, thank you very much. Victoria writes, I worked many years at the public post-secondary institutions in BC. Your listeners may want to know that every public college, university, or institute in our province has student services staff members who specialize in financial aid. So that's access to loans and grants. They offer both workshops and one-on-one assistance. That's a great tip, Victoria. Thank you very much. And Murray, yes, what are those resources that people can access? Yeah,
so definitely if you're applying, go in and talk to the financial aid office at institutions because they have access to grants, to bursaries for low-income individuals, obviously scholarships. There's another couple of good sites, studentawards.com and Scholarships Canada, where you can do a search to see what sort of scholarships you might be eligible for. And I always encourage students and parents to sit down and look at these early. So maybe in grade 9 and find out what scholarships might be out there because it also tells you what the criteria is. And if they're looking, for example, for leadership skills, that gives you a few years in high school to start developing those leadership skills, which is going to make you a better candidate for those awards once it comes time to apply in your last year of high school.
Wow, so thinking about it as early as grade 9.
Absolutely.
And I want to give out those websites once again, studentawards.com and scholarshipscanada.com. I'm sure people are rushing to write that down. Scholarshipscanada.com and studentawards.com. So think about that as early as grade 9 if you're looking ahead to post-secondary schooling for your child. 1-800-825-5950 is our toll-free line, 604-669-3733. Love to hear from you. What are your budget concerns as we head back to school? What are your financial strategies as well? If you want to share a tip, give us a call. We do have a BC Today coffee mug, a travel coffee mug, just in time for school. I remember sitting in the back of the lecture hall with coffee in hand. Oh, what I would have done without that coffee. I don't know. Michael is up next in New Westminster. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Michelle. How's it going?
Very well. Thanks for calling. What did you want to say about budgeting?
Yeah, I think, budgeting is very important, and that's some skills that we've been hearing about maybe for the last 10, 15, 20 years of how important it is for individuals to kind of focus on it. But I think we also have to kind of consider the realities that we're living in. Youth unemployment rates in British Columbia are up to like 11% now. Folks are really struggling to pay for rent. They're struggling to pay for groceries. And the tuition fees, ancillary fees, all of that is just skyrocketing. And this is all about domestic students. So I couldn't even imagine what an international student is facing with 400% or 500% tuition fees. So I really think that I might not have a solution. I think more funding into our systems, into our safety net for all British Columbians is important. But I think what really needs to be seen is actual party platforms in an election year. How are folks going to help young British Columbians succeed and thrive? We can't think about starting a business. We can't think about starting a family. We can't think about buying a home when we're barely could even put our foot in the door to access education. And it's a privilege, and we need to really consider it as a service and a right for all British Columbians.
Really good to hear from you, Michael. It's an important point. Thank you very much. Suki is our last caller now from Vancouver. Hi, Suki.
Hi, Michelle. Hi, Murray.
Hi.
Yeah, just following up on the points that Pam had made. Definitely, food is an issue, food security. And I did volunteer with the Richmond Food Bank myself in the committee called FAIR, Food Action in Richmond. And we helped to actually set up a food pantry outside the food bank. And I really think a lot of the school districts in our Greater Vancouver area, as well as in BC, should consider whether that's something we need to do, is to create these food pantries outside schools, so people who do suffer with food insecurity can have access.
Wow, that's quite innovative, Suki. Thank you so much for sharing that. Suki in Vancouver, good to hear from you. In our last minute here, Murray, what's a final tip that you'd like to leave people with?
Well, one of the tips, and we talked about budgeting, I always encourage students at the start of the year, sit down, make a budget. How much money do I have coming in from scholarships, from loans, and what are my expenses going to be? And am I going to have enough to meet those needs throughout the year? And why that's important is because if you look at that budget and say, oh, there's going to be a shortfall, you can go out and maybe take on a part-time job on campus so that you're going to have enough money. Rather than not do a budget and then find out in February you're out of money, and what happens? Phone call to mom and dad, or you start racking things up on your credit card. And I guess it's no surprise that credit card debt hit a 17-year high today, 2.5 trillion. And and having to work many hours at the end of the school year because you're short of money when your exams are coming up, you want to plan ahead.
Get that budget down. You have a week before the start of school. Murray, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Good to have you as always. Murray Baker, Manager of Financial Empowerment for Family Services of Greater Vancouver. And congratulations to Pam from Revelstoke. Thank you so much for your call and the points that you made. We are going to send you a BC Today coffee mug. Thanks for that. BC Today at cbc.ca if you want to send us more of your thoughts.